Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription.
Yeah, I guess it's the culture of mentorship that, when you foster that culture of mentorship, that is very important for leaders in the accounting space.
Yeah.
But, what advice would you give to young professionals, who are aspiring to lead in the accounting field? What qualities do you think are essential for them if they want to think about leading in this field?
Yeah, I think what is important the last 5 years versus today versus the next 5 years is going to be massively different, right?
Yep.
Because of the innovations in AI and everything coming in, right?
Yep.
So my advice to anyone coming into accounting is genuinely to view it from a standpoint of you need to be a evergreen learner.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is, and this is true historically in accounting, right? The only consistent thing in accounting is change, right? And that continues, right?
Yes.
That's literally the only thing. As a profession, we've been very good at adapting to new things, new regulations, new ways of working. There's pushback, there's struggle with it, but we've been overall relatively good with it. So if you come in with a mindset of I need to keep learning every day, learn something new every year, learn a new skill set, whether that be, AI prompting today or whatever comes down the road, having that mindset to learn.
Welcome to another episode of We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul, where we delve into the stories and insights of industry leaders. Today, we are thrilled to have Aaron Berson, a New York CPA and a CPA practice advisor 40 under 40 honoree. Aaron is recognized for his expertise in cloud-based accounting integration and helping firms modernize their practices. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Saul. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Aaron, before we dive into your work, can you start by sharing your journey and what inspired you to pursue a career in accounting?
So, my journey has been probably a similar journey to a lot of other people in the industry, or the profession rather. But long and short, went to school for undergrad and a master's in accountancy. From there, I had an internship at a Big Four accounting firm at Deloitte in New York City. At some point during that internship, realized I didn't want to be a world-renowned expert on the 4562 and not be able to do my own tax return. So then I started looking for other opportunities and places to go from there, and then went to a top 20 firm, EisnerAmper. Then while there, and this is where I think it deviates from the normal cycle of things. While there, I helped spearhead and build out the outsourced controller CFO practice in New York City, technology-based from that standpoint. Then from there, went to a regional top 200 firm, did the same thing there. And then, as I'm sure you're tired listening to this, I also got tired of why do I keep doing this for other people? And then went and built my own firm, Fringe Advisory, which is where I am now from that standpoint. So I think the career trajectory of starting at a big firm and then coming back down and actually starting your own practice, there's actually a fair amount of people that have done that. But that's kind of the journey of how I got to where I am today.
Well, that's interesting. Your career has been filled with remarkable achievements. So if you were to summarize, what are some of the key milestones that have shaped your career?
Key milestones, obviously, and I'm sure everyone says this, actually passing the CPA exam, getting the license and everything like that was a major milestone, because that's, if you're in public accounting, what a lot of people are doing it for, to have those three letters after your name. So that was a a big milestone. But I'd say prior to that, or in conjunction with that, one of the bigger milestones was actually finding an area of the profession or the work we do that I was actually truly passionate about and enjoyed doing, as opposed to just doing the work in front of me. So that was when I was actually at Eisner Amper. I started working in the technology space and startup space and working with a lot of really amazing startup founders, and just found that marriage between my love for technology and passion for technology and my classic training in accountancy, and being able to marry those two together was, I'd say, the biggest milestone for me, because then that launched the last 10 years of, or 10 plus years of me working in that type of a space with what we'll talk about in a little bit, with the modernizing practices, leveraging technology, and everything that's come from that has really been created because of that one milestone, which actually ironically was a partner at Eisner that I was working with at the time, who knew me to like technology and just walked over to me one day and goes, "You're young, you like technology, go work on this account." And then that was the spearhead of the starting of all the technology-based startup companies that I worked with after that. So it was just right place, right time.
Absolutely, right place, right time. I mean, this is phenomenal. You've been instrumental in helping traditional accounting firms modernize. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your approach to modernization and why it's so crucial today.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my approach is pretty systematic and nothing revolutionary, but I think the biggest piece of it is understanding and knowing the technology that's out there and what can be used, so that you can, what I call reimagining a practice, right? And I've said this for a long time, business reimagination, right? I use it for my clients, but
Uh-huh.
also for firms when I talk to them, of just saying, with the technology that's out there today, if you knew what you know today, or what I know, or someone that you're working with knows, how would you start over? Right? So every practice has tremendous amounts of learnings and growth that they've had from when they started a practice to wherever they are now. And they have those learnings. And now, if you couple that with the technology, knowledge, and learnings on that side, basically, if you were to start over today, what would be different? How would you look at that? So that's kind of creating that dream or ideal state of what someone's firm could be. And then kind of chunking that down to smaller, manageable bites to say, okay, well, what can we do here that'll have an impact? Because we can't just start over, right? We do have an existing firm, and if someone has employees or team members, right, they have something that exists, and how do we get that to then the ideal state or as close as possible? So then it's finding those smaller, manageable pieces to get there, right? And I typically start from the most impactful to the least impactful, from that standpoint. And one of the biggest things in that I think most people don't realize when they start looking at this is the most impactful does not need to be the most expensive or the biggest, right?
Mhm.
It could be a very minor, small tweak to something that allows you to utilize a software or implement a new one, or even just use a current software fuller, right? Or, most people use like 20, 25% of every software that they use. But if you could actually get 80, 90% value out of that software, you could do a lot more. So that's typically where I start.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess this role also involves, it's all about a strategy. You want to set up a new strategy about how you want to take the business forward. And now there's
Yeah.
this saying that I'm sure you must have heard, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, so,
Yes.
so what role does culture play in this modernization process?
So I think culture plays a big part of this. So I've heard that statement, right? Culture, and strategy and everything. But I think one of the biggest things is that a good strategy incorporates managing your culture with intentionality, right? A strategy without addressing culture is a partial strategy, right? Because your culture should be part of your strategy, right? Especially in today's world with trying to get the best talent and build the best team and everything, that's a major piece that attracts people to a firm, especially smaller firms, right? So, I mean, smaller firms, right, wrong, or indifferent, we don't have the same things to offer talent that the big four do. We just don't, right? And to ignore that is silly. So I think culture becomes a really important piece. I mean, that was something when I was building the practice at Eisner. Um, we really emphasized, and I really emphasized on culture. So, for example, in the 7 years, 7.5 years we were building that practice from the ground up, we didn't have a single person leave that practice, right? So we had zero turnover of staff in 7 years, which, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this know, that the typical public accounting turnover is 20 to 30% of staff per year, right?
Absolutely.
So in 7 years we had zero, right? And that's because we emphasized and focused on the culture, the work-life balance, the meeting employees where they were, and my philosophy of having every individual employee do the highest value task that only he or she can do, right?
Gotcha.
So you really focus on the person and not the work, from that standpoint, which we did then, and I've carried that into everywhere that I've gone and into Fringe where we are now. And I can honestly say that it feels like working with friends, not colleagues, right? And there's a lot of people that judge that statement, and I'm not saying that we're hanging out, going for drinks and doing all that stuff. What I'm saying is that we all are in this together with a shared goal. We enjoy each other's company and working with each other, and understand that we're all human. And when one person not slacks, but can't pull their weight 100%, other people step in to help out because we're a team,
Absolutely.
first and foremost. So yeah.
Absolutely. Very well put. Very well put. It's always, I guess, we all as professionals, when you're working with colleagues for a long period of time, you do tend to develop a friendship kind of an environment,
Yeah.
even if you're not hanging out every weekend, but it's natural. So,
Yeah.
but very rightly put out, I'm really glad for that. And, I would just want to, like touch a little bit on your experience with modernization. So if we could share probably an example of a firm that you helped modernize and the impact it had, if you could share a
Yeah.
little.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
Sure. So I pride myself on giving back to the profession. So I always love to engage with other practitioners to help them out, guide them in the right directions, or directions that I've seen to be beneficial, because it's one of those things that I think we struggle to find good resources or people who have done it to help others out, right? I mean, we're in a profession that's relatively traditional. Modernizing is a new thing, right? You still have a tremendous amount of firms out there that haven't even attempted to start that process, right? So there's also not a lot of people that have built modern firms, that have modernized traditional firms. And I think that's one of the very unique things in my career journey, right? I got to build a virtual practice 3 times over, once at a top 20 firm, at a top 200 firm, and once as a 2-person firm, right? So I've done it at every level, but then also in that process, part of when I was at the top 20 firm, I was taking a traditional practice that they had in bookkeeping, that was typically looked down on by CPAs, right? Oh, it's just bookkeeping. It's not, whatever. And modernizing that at that level. And then now in the last 2 years, I've bought 2 firms down in Charleston, and, very traditional paper-based firms, and modernized those, and gone through that process, and as well as helped other practitioners do the same. But to give one example that I think is really indicative of the impact that modernizing has, right? So this is one of the firms that I acquired, and then we went through this process. There's a team member that was doing quarterly payroll, right? Or payroll that was processed throughout the quarter or year or quarter end for S corp tax planning, whatever have you, right? But doing payroll for about, I want to say 60 to 70 companies, right? So not a small amount of payroll, but at the same time, so that payroll has to be run, and then every quarter you have to file the federal forms, the state forms.
Right.
You have to make the federal payments, make the state payments, all that fun stuff, right? So that was taking between that team member, myself reviewing it, and got the back and forth with clients and stuff of that nature, between 80 to 100 hours per quarter to do.
Wow.
Right? So when you think about that, actually generating the forms, reviewing them, submitting them, making the e-file payments, sending it to the clients, that whole process, right?
It's almost like 2 weeks. So
Correct. Basically, every quarter, the first 2 weeks of that quarter, that's essentially what was happening, right?
Yep.
So essentially full time for this person to do that, which in my world is insane, right? Because especially in the world where you have online cloud-based payroll that does all this stuff automatically for you, but in a smaller practice for smaller clients, that it doesn't make sense for them to be paying $50, $60, $70 a month to run payroll, especially those tax planning clients where it was one check a quarter, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for them to be paying that. Like, it just doesn't. They were doing all this actually in QuickBooks Desktop payroll, right?
Right.
So, and that also is not all manual, right? A lot of that was entered into the system and you're just printing and generating the things. And like, so there were some systems in place, but still 80 to 100 hours, right?
Yeah.
To me, insanity. So that was one of the areas where initially, I had so many different areas I wanted to focus on, but then to my point of what I said before, the low hanging fruit, where it's not the sexiest thing, it's not the most profit generating thing, right? In actuality, this cost more money to do this modernization, but took that 80 to 100 hours down to 80 to 100 minutes.
Wow.
So I kid you not, that is the delta that we're talking about. So did it cost more money to do because we put in a new payroll system, transferred everyone over to that payroll system and everything, but then the pricing of that system is not monthly, it's by check. So, it fits with the volume, everything, right? So
Yep.
a lot of boxes checked to make sure it wasn't just, hey, let's quadruple our cost, right? It wasn't like that, but the cost definitely increased. But to take someone's time from 100 hours down to 100 minutes was so liberating, not only for the practice, right, but also for that individual, right? So you think about that impact on that person's life. I mean, they just went from the first 2 weeks of every quarter doing nothing but payroll to now that being like 5 clicks of a button, right?
Wow.
She was so much happier afterwards. But then me as a firm owner, well, I just got 100 hours back of capacity per quarter, right? So you're talking about 400 hours a year I just got back of capacity of this individual, which, like, that's like 2.5 months of someone's time when you think about it,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's just one example, but like putting in one system maybe cost a little bit different, pricing a little bit different, impacts to that degree of getting an additional 25% of someone's time over the course of a year. To me, it's a no-brainer, right? So now that team member can do more work, has a better quality of life, stuff is done better and faster from my standpoint. And if I look at the total metrics at the end of the day, even though I introduced an additional cost, my profitability in total has increased because of that, because she has that 25% capacity back to work on other things, right? And do other income generating activities from that standpoint. So that's just one example of introducing a software and revisiting a process that this firm owner who I had bought the practice from had done it that way forever, right? So why had he not changed? Just because that's how it was done, right? The Sally acronym, right? Same as last year, right?
Yeah.
He had done it that way forever, so he kept doing it that way forever. And then I come in, I look at it, and I say, what, right? So in general, and that's kind of one of the big things with anyone when I talk to them about modernizing their practice, is stepping back and truly working on the firm instead of in the firm, right? Step back and become a business owner, not just a production machine, which I think is where a lot of, especially solo practitioners or small firms where those CPAs tend to reside, is production, production, production. 50, 60, 70% of the production is done by that one individual. So, I mean, my dad is a tax preparer also, and I joke with him, I'm like, I'm trying to build a company. You've built a really great job for yourself, right? When he decides to stop working, that thing does no longer exists because he does 95% of the work, right?
Wow.
Whereas what I try to urge people to go towards is having a true business built, like we advise our clients, right? Build a business, not a job for yourself, right? My hope for anyone is they either have an asset that's worth selling when they do want to retire and someone else can take over, right? If you have no processes, nothing in place, it's very difficult for someone to take over. I mean, I happen to do that with 2 firms in the last 2 years, but I talk to other practitioners and 90% of the people I talk to would not touch that with a 10-foot pole. I'm just a little bit crazy, and I've done it so many times that I'm like, modernizing a practice doesn't scare me, but walking in and having a 6-room office and 2 of those rooms are filled with filing cabinets of papers for the last 5 years,
Wow.
like a lot of people would look at that and run the other direction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I look
Absolutely.
at that and I'm like, ooh, a challenge, let's go. Um, but I think that's one of the big things also. Like if you are a smaller firm and you want to ultimately have an exit strategy, you have to make sure that your practice is able to be acquired by someone, whether that be someone who wants to modernize it, another more traditional practice, or somewhere in between. Uh, Otherwise, you have to find someone crazy like me who wants to take that challenge on, right? But yeah, so I'll stop with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it said, you can't solve modern problems using old tricks. You gotta innovate. You gotta come up with new ways. And
Yeah.
I guess technology is a field that has been constantly changing. It's innovating, and of late, it's also been changing the accounting landscape, especially with the intervention of AI and automation that has like tremendously like changed everything in the
Yes.
way we see the business. But you
Yeah.
know, and I'm sure you come across this as well. But you have been a witness of adopting these technologies and making this transition for firms. So, I don't want to talk on that because I'm sure that would be a different story altogether. But
That's a whole nother podcast,
it's
just
all,
in AI alone. But yeah.
yeah. But like, if I were to ask you, like, how should the firms approach integrating this AI and automation? How should they integrate these technologies into their existing process? How should they do that?
Yeah. So depending on who you ask, you'll get 10,000 different answers. I mean, typical accounting world, right? Um, but and if you ask a security person, they'll paint the picture of the end of the world. You ask someone who wants people to adopt AI, they're also painted as the end of the accounting profession. Um, I think as a profession, we have a lot that we're going up against with AI and just technology in general. Um, Nothing that we as a profession haven't faced before. With the introduction of Lotus 123 and then Excel with spreadsheets and going from nothing or relatively nothing into the Quicken and QuickBooks and online cloud accounting and cloud spaces and all of that stuff that we've faced. And that's just a few of the big things in the last 35, 40 years. I think the biggest difference with the AI disruption versus any of the previous ones is the pace in which it is happening, right?
Yes.
The pace in which AI and technologies are changing, and to give a simple ballpark, back when I first started my career in 2010, right, cloud accounting was just coming into the forefront of the world. It had been around for a decade previous to that, right? I think back in the early 2000s with QuickBooks going to QuickBooks Online and MYOB and all these other options. It had been around. It was just getting into popularity in 2010, 2012, 13. And now here we are, over a decade later, and you still are having people not truly bought into cloud technology and everything, and much better than where it was, but you're still not even there, and that's over a decade later. Whereas AI and the innovation that's happening with AI, if you look at, I'm not even going to say 13 years, you look at 13 months ago, it was wildly different, what was capable versus what's capable now, where that acceleration is insane, right? So long-winded way of getting back to your question, but practitioners and firm owners, how do you adopt this AI, especially when it's changing so rapidly, right? There's concerns around security, concerns around usage policies and all these types of things. And what I've seen so many firms do, both large and small, is try to hold on with the tightest fist possible to prevent people from using it for certain things, or put guardrails around it and all these types of things, as opposed to embracing it with positive, examples of use cases. Instead, they're giving the negative examples of how you cannot use it within practices and firms, right? So you just create this culture around, if I'm going to mess with AI, it's a bad thing, but yet you see all this stuff on social media that it's going to end the accounting profession, tax prep is dead, and doomsday stuff, which I think is going to drastically change the profession and drastically change how we do the work, and put emphasis on different skills, right? 30 years ago, being able to write in 13-column ledger paper really neatly was a very important skill set. Today, someone would laugh at you if you had that as a skill set and tried to put it as a benefit, right? Because we don't need that. We have technology systems. So doing certain aspects of data entry and certain pieces that we tout as skill sets today, in another few years, who knows if that's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we're going to laugh at someone who says that they have that skill set of they're able to enter, 100 AP bills an hour or whatever it is. We're going to laugh at you because that's no longer relevant, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. It's going to disrupt it in the way of change our skill sets that we look for. So when I talk to practitioners, and even in my own firm, how do I want to implement AI? One, I want to set the example for my team members, right? So I want to give them positive use cases of how I think AI easily fits in, and again, that low-hanging fruit, how it benefits them, right? It benefits them and the clients. And again, that's not the sexiest thing or the most amazing thing, right? The easiest place to start, and we actually talked about this at the 40 Under 40 symposium, right? Because everyone hears all these things that the certain thought leaders are doing around AI, right? They're doing this amazing thing, and then I'm left behind. How can I do that? It's impossible, right? And then the people get turned off from AI and don't even want to entertain it because it seems too overwhelming. But the simplest place to start is just a low-hanging, unsexy thing. So what I tell people to start with is just using AI to review and tweak and proofread important emails you send out, right? It is a extremely low-hanging fruit. There's no pressure. You don't have to build a whole system. You don't need to do all these other things. You just ad hoc pick random emails to use, right? Yep. Easiest thing, you get the paid subscription to ChatGPT, draft up your email, put it in, ask it to tweak it, give it a prompt. You don't even have to give it an amazing prompt, right? Everyone talks about, oh, you have to be a prompt engineer and all this stuff, right? No, you just give it, and you just say, proofread and edit this email to my client. Quote, paste the email, quote, it spits back something a little bit more polished, right? Very simple.
Yeah.
Simple, low stakes. You tweak it afterwards, you go back and forth and you learn how to say certain things, but low stakes, but big impact, right? Because you get a more professional, consistent tone with your emails. And also that's a great use case to say to your lower level staff, utilize this when sending client emails, because now they get to have a better sounding email. They get that feedback that historically has to come from a manager taking the time to review that email, to talk to them, to give them pointers and everything. Now they can kind of self-service email review, right? So again, you find a task that's impactful, you give a good use case to a team member, empower them to use that, right, and tweak it and learn from it, because then they're also learning the tool, and they could come back with other examples of how you might want to use it, things like that.
Yeah.
Also, one of the biggest things in that capacity is I joke around and say that ChatGPT is my business therapist at this point, because when a client gets really frustrating, which we've all been there, right? And you want to send a nasty email back to that client,
Yeah.
right? I literally at one point, this was probably at like 10 p.m. on like a day during tax season, unreasonable, just like I was frustrated. I went into ChatGPT, copy and pasted their email, just spewed regurgitation of just mental thoughts of how upset I was, all this other stuff, right? And just like asked it to then write a response back to that email. I had the release of venting to ChatGPT, and then it literally regurgitated the perfect response back to them, 100% professional, taking out 99% of everything that I said, right? But I got it off my chest.
Yes.
Got back a very polished email, copy and pasted it, tweaked a few things, sent it off to the client, resolved the issue, moved on. But I felt better, and I didn't get nasty with my client.
Yeah.
And it's ironic, but it was like, that's a very great use for AI is, let me give you all this context, right, about everything that's happened with this client, vent, get it off my chest, and then get a very polished email back, right? So yeah, it's the unsexy things, right,
Yeah.
that I always tell people to start with.
Yeah.
But that's honestly the easiest thing, right? Versus getting into automated workflows and integrating systems with one another and building in no code or low code tools to automate all these processes and everything, which you can get to. And AI massively helps there, right? But it doesn't need to be where you start, despite what we see out there. And I myself have been a victim of this. I see what people post out there, and I'm like, I'm behind. I don't know, like I'm so far, and I'm doing this stuff and to helping other people with it. And for me to be like, I'm not using enough AI, I'm behind. Look at what this person did, that person did. I can only imagine what a practitioner is thinking who has done nothing with this. So yeah, I mean, sorry, long-winded way of answering the question, but that's where I recommend people start. Low-hanging fruit, simple, not a whole system, just ad hoc uses of AI. That's one example. Another example is uploading bank transactions and just saying, hey, can you suggest a category for this in a first pass, right?
Yeah.
And it's a starting point, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I guess, and also one important point that you brought out, in fact, very interesting thing you said. You said about, sharing with your team those use cases, those examples, because that gets that thoughts thinking, and especially when it's coming from like a senior person, like maybe a manager or somebody, who understands the business, and who it's also a way for letting the subordinates know that I know the pain area that you're going through, and this is a way to make it better.
Yeah.
Which loosely ties into what you spoke during culture, that they are humans first, so bringing all that in. But you have been a mentor, you have been actually mentoring, so next generation of accountants. But I would always love to know the story, what drove you to take on this role?
So yes, I try to mentor the next generation, the last generation, really anyone who wants help. I try to help. But what drove me to it was, honestly, I had an amazing mentor when I started at Eisner. Right, my direct supervisor, Saul Zimmerman. He might hear this, he might not hear this, but he was amazing, right? As a mentor, as a colleague, and he challenged me. He explained things in simple ways, use certain tactics when he taught me things that I use when I teach my team and everyone I talk to. Um, and I had that, right? I was, and I view myself as extremely fortunate to have stumbled into that position where he was my manager and I worked with him on probably 85% of the work I did in my first year or two, working at Eisner. And then, his boss above him, who was his mentor, working with them, I just viewed myself, and I still do view myself as extremely fortunate to have had someone who was willing to teach me and help me and guide me and put up with my ups and downs and my lack of clarity and all these things, right? But who stood by, not smacking me upside the head, but symbolically smacking me upside the head, right?
Yes.
And helping me through those things. And then, looking at people around me and in other firms and everything who didn't have that resource or didn't click with someone in the same way that I did with him. And I just look around and I'm like, that's so valuable. And so many people are so immersed in what they're doing that even if you ask them for help, they maybe give you a 10-minute phone call or a 30-minute,
Yeah.
they'll engage with you and everything, but not much beyond that, or truly asking questions of and stuff like that, that I found it so helpful to our profession, right? Because look, I was also working at one of the top 20 accounting firms, so technically driven with amazing resources that I had access to that, now as my own firm, I don't have access to. Other people that are my set don't have access to. I had that, and I had that amazing training. So if I could help others and disseminate that information and ways of thinking, I just view it as so helpful to the individuals and our profession at large that I view it as the least I can do to give back to the profession and the other people out there, right? Um, it's just
Absolutely.
my way of giving back because I feel so fortunate. But then it's also very rewarding, right?
Yep.
From that standpoint, that aha moment when someone finally gets something,
Yeah.
right? Or when I talk to smaller practitioners, and I have some people in my network who have reached out to me from when I was back at the big firm and still ask me technical questions that I'm able to give advice on. And I just think to myself, if they couldn't ask that of me, what would they have had to do, right? And it's either they wouldn't have known the answer and potentially lost a client. They would have had to spend hours researching, and who knows if they would have even understood what they researched, right? Because
Yeah.
researching is another skill that you
Yeah.
know is out there. Um, so I find it very personally rewarding, and I just genuinely view it as the absolute least I can do to give back to a profession that has given me so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess it's the culture of mentorship that, when you foster that culture of mentorship, that is very important for leaders in the accounting space.
Yeah.
But, what advice would you give to young professionals, who are aspiring to lead in the accounting field? What qualities do you think are essential for them if they want to think about leading in this field?
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Yeah. Uh, I think what is important the last 5 years versus today versus the next 5 years is going to be massively different, right?
Yep.
Because of the innovations in AI and everything coming in, right?
Yep.
So my advice to anyone coming into accounting is genuinely to view it from a standpoint of you need to be a evergreen learner.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is, and this is true historically in accounting, right? The only consistent thing in accounting is change, right? And that
Yeah.
continues, right?
Yes.
That's literally the only thing. As a profession, we've been very good at adapting to new things, new regulations, new ways of working. There's pushback, there's struggle with it, but we've been overall relatively good with it. So if you come in with a mindset of I need to keep learning every day, learn something new every year, learn a new skill set, whether that be, you know, AI prompting today or whatever comes down the road, having that mindset to learn is the most important thing, right?
Absolutely.
In my opinion, right? I approach everything with that in mind, and I would hire someone who's willing to put in the effort to learn something new than hire someone who already knows it any day of the week. So that's the biggest thing, but at the same time, there's other core competencies that we need as client service practitioners, right? Ideally, be comfortable talking to people, right? And if you're
Oh,
not
yes.
comfortable talking to people,
Yes,
find a way to get comfortable talking to people.
absolutely.
As much as we are, practitioners and we're doing the work, any level of work that you're doing, you have to interact with clients, because as much as I would love to be able to do what we do without clients, we still need them. So
Yeah, yeah. And you rightly put out, talking, because there is talking and then there is actual talking. Because like if I were to share my experience, if I were to talk to the accounts team about anything, if I'm talking to the accountant, he's saying something, I'm understanding something, but it's just that according to him, he thinks that that's all. I mean, like, what? You just gotta give me your declaration, and that's it, and then I can get your W2s done and everything. Now I'm listening to him, and I'm like, okay, this is something that he's talking about. What is he talking? Because it's I'm just not able to make sense of what exactly is he trying to say. Like the layman approach or whatever that thing is. I don't really know what that is, but that's very essential.
yeah, I think that actually goes hand in hand with being an evergreen learner to also being a consistent teacher, right?
Yeah.
And a constant educator. Because whether we're teaching other people in the profession or teaching our key stakeholders, whether they're internal at the company we work for or external clients if we're in public accounting, there's a level of I need to bring this person along with my thought process and the journey so that they understand one, what I'm asking and why the hell I'm asking it, right? I mean, that's the reality. You could ask someone 10,000 times for their expense report, and if someone doesn't put value on that, they don't care and they're not going to prioritize it, right? Like,
Absolutely.
but if they understand the bigger picture of why and all that, like you can bring them along in that. So I think that that's a very important trait. And to your point, yes, there's talking versus explaining or
Yeah.
conversing. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
conversing. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
word. That's the word. Rightly
Yeah.
said. Well, I'm now gonna dive a little bit into, like knowing a little bit about you as a person. You know, you've been a fantastic professional, but with all this technological innovation that you've done, I noticed that somewhere an importance of work-life balance has been something that has always been at the back of your mind.
Yes.
So give me
Yes.
your secret. What are the strategies that you use to manage the stress and maintain the productivity and have this work-life balance and everything?
It's hard. the
Yeah.
the secret sauce is it's hard. No, but the reality of it is I think that the biggest thing with work-life balance is intentionality. Um, and the reason I say that is because if you just expect that there's going to be a natural work-life balance, there's not, right? Things creep in one way or the other, whether that be creeping in business to personal life or personal life to business and everything from that standpoint. But that's why I've focused very heavily in my career, both for me and my team, on focusing on the individual and the human first, as opposed to the job and the role and the production. And the reason why is because I feel like that naturally brings a better work life balance. And what I mean by that is we are not a different person at work than we are at home.
Uh-huh.
Despite everyone putting on these facades and these pictures of perfect, immaculate, whatever at work, and then they fall apart at home, or maybe they're put together at home. Doesn't matter. But you're not two different people. You're the same person. You might have different responsibilities and ways of being in each space, but they affect each other, right? So if you're stressed at home, you're going to be stressed or more easily agitated at work, and vice versa. So I've always emphasized and offered to my team, you know, a true open door policy of, my ear is always here to listen. If that's, you want to vent about your spouse or your kid, or you want to, tell me, like, I don't care what it is, talk to me. And also talk to me because I want you to be human first. So if you have something going on at home, and I'm truly living my mantra of working with the human, not the job. And this happened not even in 2 weeks ago. One of my team members uh, came into the office and was so stressed out, and I was having a call with her, and I asked her, what's going on? Like, something's off. And then she tells me about this whole story of how the water main burst in her basement. It's flooded, this, that. She's trying to handle all these things. And I just looked at her and I was like, go home. Like,
Yeah.
take care of that. Like, the reality is, you being stressed at work, you're not as productive. You're going to be shorter with clients. They're not going to have the same, love of you. You're going to be shorter with team. Like, it's just not positive. Like,
Yeah.
go home, take care of yourself, right? Take care of your situation. Maybe you only need half a day of dedicated time, whereas if you were coming to work, it's going to drag out over 3 days, right? Like, so to me, the secret sauce to work-life balance is prioritize the person, not the
Yep.
job. And that's for
Absolutely.
management down. If you're not in management, a little bit harder, right? Because if they set a culture where they're prioritizing the job, not the human, it's tougher. But from that standpoint, and I've been there as well, you have to set clear boundaries. And this is going to sound ironic or harsh, but you need to respect yourself enough to enforce those boundaries.
Wow.
Because when you let someone else cross those boundaries, or you don't uphold them, all you're doing is saying, what I've said is important to me is not actually important to me.
Oh.
And what I say, I want this line, you can walk all over me. Like,
Oh.
that's what you're saying. And I know it's direct and it's harsh, right? But like,
No, no, it's good.
and I've been there, and
Yeah.
I did it. And actually, I had not a mentor, but this was actually a client say this to me, right? A
Wow.
client said that to me
Wow.
when I was actually people pleasing that client, right? He actually called me up, and we have a good relationship. He's still a client of mine now. I've been working with
Yep.
him for 4 or 5 years. He said to me, that exact phrase, and that really, like, hit me hard, because I was like, wow,
Yeah.
how can anyone else respect you and respect your boundaries if you don't, right?
Yeah.
So as an employee, if your boundary is, I got to be on the 5:30 train home to get home to my kids, or to do whatever, just I need to leave the office at 5 o'clock to get to this thing I like to do, communicate that, and then uphold it. Sure, there's give and take, right? Like, there's extenuating circuit. We work in a profession that has deadlines, things like that. But again, that's where, if you communicate with your supervisors or with your staff around these things, you can make plans for it. And I'm very intentional about that. If I do have to ask someone to stay late, I tell them to come in late the next day, right? It's not I ask for more and still take more and take more and take more. It's
Yeah.
I ask for more, but I recognize I asked for more, and I give you something back, right?
Absolutely.
Because give and take.
It's a give and take.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and those are the two things that I recommend for everyone who's trying to maintain work-life balance, whether you're the supervisor or the underling, as some
Yeah.
people have said, right? Um, you're not helpless no matter what position you're in. Even if you're middle management, you have the ability. If upper management is more toxic, you have the ability to stop it with you and not push that down, and be the person who pushes back up. And if you're the person down below, you have the ability and the permission to protect yourself, right? And I tell people this all the time. There's no shortage of jobs in accounting right now.
Yeah.
If you're in a toxic environment and you put that boundary and they don't respect it, or they get angry at you, start looking for another job. You can
Well,
find another one. Like, they exist. come talk to me. I'll help you find another job. If I have a job, I'll hire you. Like, I'm fine with it, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
there's people out there that will hire you and will respect you and respect
Absolutely.
your boundaries. So
Absolutely.
that's the core for work-life balance. Just
Absolutely.
continue.
You gotta be the change you gotta see in the world, right? So you gotta be that change, and if you can't change the game, change the game.
Yeah, if you can't change the game, change the board. That's what I say, right? Everyone's playing games. If this firm is playing this game, you can't change it, but you can change your board to a different firm. And
Absolutely.
now the landscape is different and things will land differently for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Aaron, I mean, this entire conversation has been full of, I mean, it's gone from practical insights to that Shifu level wisdom that you shared with us. So, before I let you go, before we wrap up, what are your final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners about the future of accounting?
It's going to be interesting. That's that's all I have to say. No, it's going to be very interesting, the future of accounting, both the private sector and the public sector, where we see the profession going from the skills that are valued to the skills that become yesterday's value. But I truly don't think that the profession is going anywhere. I think it is going to go under a massive overhaul and facelift. It's going to look very different. Um, it's terrifying to me as someone who's aware of this and trying to do the change. So I could only imagine for other people. But I truly do think there are tremendous amounts of opportunity in the profession. And I say that from the perspective of I work with hundreds of clients. I work with, tens and tens of practitioners. And one thing has been consistent, especially with all the AI that comes into play and all the technology. There is always a pendulum, right, of swinging back and forth between competing priorities or competing values, right? If you look at the traditional paper-based one-to-one relationships, personal relationships on one side, and you have the super automated, lacking of relationship, cost-effective, streamlined thing on the other end, right? We are definitely swinging towards the efficiency side right now.
Yep.
But every pendulum has to swing back or ultimately land in the middle at that equilibrium
Yep.
because everyone values things differently. And I could say I've seen this, especially with the two firms that I bought. If you tried to tell those clients, okay, you're now talking to this bot, you're never going to talk to a human again, everything's going to be automated, it's going to land in your inbox, and you go off on that, 75% of them are going to be like, oh, that's really cool. No thanks. And they're going to go someplace else because they value the relationship, right?
Yes.
They're not really valuing the work, although they need the work, right?
Yes.
They value the relationship. They value having, as some of my clients say, you're my tax guy, right? You're
Yeah.
my guy, right?
Yeah.
They value being able to pick up the phone and speaking to a human and getting an answer, or something to that degree. So I think we're swinging towards that less personal, but I think it's going to come back and come back very aggressively, where people are going to get very tired of that and want the personal. And in the meantime, the personal white glove is going to become higher and higher value and actually have,
Yeah.
demand a higher cost and a price, and people will pay it.
Yeah.
But the reason I say that is it's a cycle, it ebbs and flows, and the future is going to be wildly different than where we are today and where it has been yesterday.
Absolutely.
But what is valued is going to shift. So if you do have a knack for accounting or you're already in the accounting space, I would genuinely pick something to prioritize that you enjoy doing, focus on it, become the best that you can possibly be at it, and you will find your tribe of clients and other practitioners who feel the same way, and you will have great opportunities from it.
Very, very,
That's really what I would say down the road for anyone in the profession, because that's what I've done. It's worked phenomenally for me. And if I was in the same place I was 10 years ago today, it would be a different thing that I was focusing on, but I would follow the same path that I did looking back at it to give someone else the advice. It's not looking back at it that I'd say, oh, but I do all this stuff differently. No, I would literally do it the exact same way. I'd probably try to do it even faster, right? And focus on it even more and be less distracted by other things. But there's so much opportunity in our profession that it scares me and fascinates me at
Yep.
what the next generation is going to look like and the next version of the profession. But I'm here for the ride and excited to see, but it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for such a
Thank you for
great
having me.
discussion. And for our listeners, stay tuned for more episodes of We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in everything you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.